March 13th, 1997, Phoenix, Arizona. On that night, a massive and unexplained light appeared in the sky. At first, people assumed it was just an airplane, but very quickly they realized something was wrong. The lights were enormous, they were completely silent, and they moved far too slowly. This was not just a light in the sky. Thousands of people, on the same night, under the same sky, reported seeing the same object. And even today, no one has fully explained what appeared over Phoenix that night. Years later, the incident would become one of the most famous UFO sightings in American history. People would come to call it the Phoenix Lights. March 13th, 1997. The night in Phoenix began like any other. People were coming home from work. Families were eating dinner while watching television. Some people were driving along the highway. Others were outside walking their dogs. It was an ordinary Thursday night. At the time, Phoenix was already one of the largest cities in the United States. Millions of people were finishing another normal day beneath the desert sky. But as the clock moved closer to 8 p.m., people began noticing something strange. At first, it looked like a distant light. Some thought it was a star. Others assumed it was a military aircraft. But the lights appeared unusually low in the sky, and they were not moving like normal airplanes. They moved slowly, very slowly, gliding across the city. Soon people began stepping outside. Cars on the highway slowed down. Drivers opened their doors and looked upward. Families gathered in front yards, staring toward the same section of the sky. And one by one, the city began looking up. The witness accounts were shockingly similar. People described a massive V-shaped formation of lights. There were multiple lights, but they did not move independently. They moved together, as if attached to one enormous craft. But the strangest detail was the silence. Normally, something that massive moving through the sky should have produced an overwhelming engine sound. But witnesses said they heard nothing. Absolutely nothing. Many described the object as impossibly silent. Some said it moved smoothly, almost as if it were gliding. Others said it almost felt alive. Several witnesses admitted they felt genuine fear, a deep, instinctive fear that they could not explain. And in that moment, many realized something unsettling. This was not a normal aircraft. One witness later said, "It felt as if all the sound around him suddenly disappeared." Another claimed, "It felt like time itself had slowed down." People were not simply watching lights in the sky. They felt as though they were confronting something completely unknown. After the incident, one description appeared again and again. It was enormous. Witnesses struggled to describe its size. It was simply too large to compare to anything familiar. Some claimed it was larger than a football field. Others said it felt large enough to cover an entire neighborhood. But one detail appeared repeatedly in witness accounts. As the object passed overhead, the stars disappeared. People said something massive moved above them, blocking out the night sky itself. And in that moment, many realized they were not simply looking at lights. They felt as though something gigantic was moving directly over the city. One man pulled his car over to the side of the road, looked upward, and later described feeling unable to breathe. Another woman became so frightened, she rushed her children back inside the house. And yet, strangely, the object did not appear aggressive. It moved slowly, silently, calmly crossing over Phoenix. Several witnesses later said, standing beneath its enormous shadow felt overwhelming. It was so massive they felt the urge to run, but at the same time, they simply could not look away. That night, people witnessed something they would remember for the rest of their lives. What made the incident even more disturbing was the sheer number of witnesses. This was not a story told by only a few people. Police departments received countless phone calls that night. Citizens reported strange objects moving across the sky. And the witnesses were not just ordinary civilians. They were former pilots, military personnel, police officers, people with aviation experience. One pilot claimed he had never seen anything like it in his entire life. Another insisted the movement did not resemble human technology. But perhaps the most shocking witness of all was the governor of Arizona himself, Fife Symington. He was not simply a politician. He was a former Air Force officer and an experienced pilot, a man familiar with aircraft and the sky. Shortly after the incident, he held a press conference. And during that press conference, people witnessed something bizarre. He brought out a man dressed as an alien, as if the entire incident was some kind of joke. People laughed. The room relaxed. And suddenly, the incident no longer seemed serious. At the time, talking about UFOs in America often led to ridicule. Many people assumed even the governor did not believe the witnesses. But then, 10 years later, Fife Symington made a shocking confession. In a 2007 interview, he admitted that he too had seen the object that night. He claimed the reason for the joke at the press conference was to calm public fear. But the most chilling part of his statement came next. He said he did not believe what he saw was made by humans. And he insisted it was unlike any aircraft he had ever seen before. The confession from a former pilot and governor shocked many people. Because if someone with years of aviation experience could not explain it, then what exactly had appeared over Phoenix that night? And then people remembered another strange detail. Thousands of people claimed they saw a massive object in the sky. Yet radar systems at Sky Harbor International Airport reportedly detected nothing. People clearly saw something so enormous that an entire city stopped to look upward. But the machines recorded nothing. It could be seen with human eyes, but it did not appear on radar. And even today, that contradiction remains one of the most mysterious parts of the Phoenix Lights case. As the story spread across the country, the military finally responded. According to officials, the lights seen over Phoenix were nothing more than military flares. They claimed that A-10 attack aircraft from the Maryland Air National Guard had dropped training flares during an exercise. And to some people, the explanation sounded reasonable. In fact, video footage from that night did show bright lights descending in the southern sky. The military insisted those lights were exactly what people had seen. At first, many people felt relieved. If there were the logical explanation, then perhaps there was nothing to fear. But the relief did not last long. Witnesses quickly pushed back against the military's explanation. People argued that what they saw was not consistent with falling flares, because flares fall downward. The object witnesses described did not. According to many reports, the lights maintained their formation while moving across the city. Several witnesses even claimed they watched the object disappear behind distant mountains. There were simply too many details that the flare explanation could not fully address. But perhaps the strangest part was this. Witnesses from completely different locations described nearly identical shapes and movements. And then another question emerged. Some researchers pointed out that the timeline did not fully match. The objects seen earlier that evening and the later footage of military flares may not have been the same thing at all. In other words, people may have first witnessed an enormous unexplained craft and only later saw military flares in the distance. But despite the growing questions, the official explanation never changed. The military continued to insist the lights were simply flares. Yet, in the minds of many witnesses, the case was far from over. Because the fear they experienced that night felt impossible to explain with something as ordinary as military flares. Even years later, many people still refuse to believe the military's explanation. The reason was simple. Too many people had seen it with their own eyes. Witnesses repeatedly said it did not resemble a normal aircraft, and it did not behave like flares. Many described it as moving like one enormous presence above the city, and above all else, it was silent. Some witnesses claimed it passed so close overhead, it seemed to move directly above their rooftops. And yet somehow, there was no engine noise, only silence. Researchers who later analyzed witness footage also raised questions. The lights appeared evenly spaced. Their movements seemed connected and controlled. Of course, not everyone believed it was a UFO. Some argued it was simply an optical illusion. Others believed it may have been an experimental military aircraft. And some suggested the entire incident could have been caused by mass psychology. But even decades later, many witnesses continued repeating the same thing. What they saw that night did not feel ordinary. As time passed, more people began speaking publicly about what they had seen. Some admitted they stayed silent because they feared being mocked. At the time, local newspapers and television stations often treated the incident like a joke. Some broadcasts even added silly UFO sound effects, turning witnesses into entertainment. Because of that, many people felt uncomfortable sharing what they experienced. And perhaps that was also why the governor chose humor during his press conference. Maybe laughter felt safer than fear. But no matter how much time passed, witnesses said they could never forget what they saw that night. The massive lights, the impossible silence, the overwhelming feeling that something enormous had crossed over the city. To many of them, it never felt like a simple misunderstanding. And even today, many people still believe. Something unexplained appeared over Phoenix that night. For decades, UFO stories in America were treated as jokes. Anyone claiming to see strange objects in the sky was often ridiculed or dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. Government agencies usually denied the incidents or explained them away as ordinary events. But over time, the atmosphere slowly began to change. The U.S. military started collecting more reports involving unexplained aerial objects, and eventually the government stopped relying on the term UFO. Instead, officials began using a new phrase, unidentified aerial phenomena, a term often shortened to UAP. The Department of Defense later released real footage recorded by military pilots. The videos showed objects performing movements that seemed difficult to explain. Some changed direction instantly. Others moved at incredible speeds. And as public interest grew, people once again began revisiting older, unexplained cases. One of the most frequently mentioned cases was the Phoenix Lights, a night witnessed by thousands, Massive lights crossing silently over a major American city, an object that reportedly never appeared on radar, and a governor who waited 10 years before admitting he had seen it himself. Once again, people began asking the same question. What if the witnesses really did see something beyond human technology? And even now, nobody can answer that question with certainty. On the night of March 13th, 1997, thousands of people looked up at the same sky. And many of them told remarkably similar stories. They described enormous lights that were silent, massive, and deeply unsettling. Some believe it was a military experiment. Others believe it was nothing more than a misunderstanding. And some remain convinced it was something not made by humans. But one fact remains undeniable. That night, thousands of people witnessed the same unexplained phenomenon. And even today, no one has fully explained what appeared over Phoenix. One of the most famous UFO sightings in American history, the Phoenix Lights. Something people could clearly see with their own eyes. Yet something radar systems reportedly never detected. And 10 years later, even the governor admitted he had hidden the truth. So the question still remains. What exactly moved across the sky above Phoenix that night? If this story left you wondering, the next one is waiting for you. Subscribe and stay with us.